It's October the 3rd, 2022, and our reading today in the book of Psalms is Psalm 39. I said, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I will put a muzzle on my mouth as long as the wicked are in my presence. But when I was silent and still, not even saying anything good, my anguish increased. My heart grew hot within me, and as I meditated, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. Show me, O Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting is my life. You made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Each man's life is but a breath. Man is a mere phantom as he goes to and fro. He bustles about, but only in vain. He heaps up wealth and not knowing who will get it. But now, Lord, what do I look for? My hope is in you. Save me from all my transgressions. Do not make me the scorn of fools. I was silent. I would not open my mouth, for you are the one who has done this. Remove your scourge from me. I'm overcome by the blow of your hand. You rebuke and discipline men for their sin. You consume their wealth like a moth. Each man is but a breath. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Listen to my cry for help. Be not deaf to my weeping, for I dwell with you as an alien, a stranger, as all my fathers were. Look away from me, that I may rejoice again before I depart and am no more. Amen. I remember talking with a dear friend of mine. She was the organist of the church that I was going to preach at the following Sunday. She was an outstanding, faithful Christian and about as involved in the life of that church as you could be. But in the course of this memorable conversation, this was many years ago, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. Suddenly there was a pause. Then she started to sniffle, to cry, to weep very deeply. And I tried to get out of her what was the problem. And you know what it was? She said, I am so afraid of death. She hadn't spoken about it to anybody, but like David, I think, in this psalm. But eventually it broke out of him. And Psalm 39 was the result. For my friend on that occasion, I'm sure, but for every one of us who from time to time might struggle in that way. Verses 1-3 show us a strained silence from David. He keeps his mouth shut. We often use these verses to say how we should be careful what we say in the presence of unbelievers. And that's true. But I don't think that's really what is going on here in the context of what follows. He says, I'll watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I'll put a muzzle on my mouth as long as the wicked are in my presence. I think what he's talking about is that he's having these doubts and fears concerning death, and he dare not bring this up, particularly in the company of the wicked, unbelievers. He wants to be a testimony to them. He wants to speak to them. But his mouth is shut because he's got this internal struggle of his own faith to deal with at the moment. He's struggling with the thought of the brevity of life and the certainty of death. So he can't talk about that. He dare not talk about that. But as he goes on, keeping this under wraps, as it were, look what he says. My heart grew hot within me. As I meditated, the fire burned. He's thinking about these issues. He's going to explode. And he does, in a sense. Then I spoke with my tongue. Not to the wicked. That's not appropriate. He was right to zip it as far as they were concerned. But he's got to the point, and we often get to this point, where we can't do anything else or go anywhere else. We've got to talk to the Lord. And so verses 4 to 6, his doubts and his fears come bursting out. That's what we have next. He has suppressed this issue. I think we often do. The certainty of death. I mean, who wants to think about that or talk about that too much? And anyway, perhaps he said to himself, well, look, why am I thinking like this? I'm a believer. I have put my faith in the living God. I'm saved. I know where I'm going. But still, he has these concerns and these burdens upon him. This is David, one of the greatest believers of all time. So we're not to be surprised if we get little spasms, little feelings like this, sometimes overwhelming feelings of doubt and of fear when we think of suffering and death. He certainly does. But the great thing is that he pours it out to the Lord, verses 4 to 6. And then verses 7 to 11, that's part of the antidote. That's part of the therapy that he needs. To get what comes next is a proper perspective restored. Because he is a true believer, we do have great hope in this life and for the life to come. And look at verse 7. But now, Lord, what do I look for? My hope is in you. Okay, it's been, for a little while, it seems to have been subdued or undermined, or maybe he even feels he's lost it. I think that's what my friend on the phone having that conversation. She was a believer, but she just wasn't believing that hope, that future, that triumph in the Lord. She wasn't feeling it. She wasn't getting it. She wasn't quite believing it. And that can be very, very distressing for a true believer. Maybe as well, some have said, verse 10, the language there seems to indicate a sort of a terminal condition. It might be at this point that David thinks he's dying and the end has come. And we might all think, or we'd like to think, that true believers will kind of respond triumphantly to those moments, and we'll quote Psalm 23. Well, this isn't Psalm 23. And there are dark valleys here which David is not coping with very well. Maybe he's terminally ill. Maybe he's on his deathbed. Maybe he thinks he's going to die any moment. Maybe, as in the previous Psalm 38, this is linked in some way with some kind of sin, maybe even the same sin that we saw there in the previous Psalm, because some of the language of discipline and chastening and humbling is used. And this is also upsetting him and also perplexing him. And so his priority and his perspective now, 7 to 11, is he must experience spiritual deliverance, forgiveness. Yes, the Lord might heal him and raise him up again, but the great thing he needs is forgiveness. He needs to get right with God. He needs to put his hope and faith and trust again in the Lord, which is exactly what he does. And he needs to restore that hope, or God helps him to, and then to maintain that hope, leading verses 12 to 13 to a final prayer. I'm sure that my friend that I've mentioned, I'm sure that she had these ups and downs. On that particular occasion, it was a down, but I'm sure she came back to putting her hope in the Lord. And my friend, you can do that as well. Even as you're listening to this today, we don't tend to think, do we? We don't tend to focus too much on the end of our lives. And we can even be a little bit glib and superficial about death and things like that. And then suddenly we realize it's coming. Suddenly a sickness hits. Maybe it is terminal. And the end looms large. And we're not prepared. My friends, we can be. Psalm 39 will help us to prepare, to get into that place of hope and faith and love and peace, to get into that place where we hear again and we believe again and we respond to again to the greatest words ever spoken on this issue. Jesus said, I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world.